Yeah, great to be here. When I started to talk or work with ACS on this, I love talking about storytelling. So this is a great opportunity to share my passion for telling stories, and hopefully we can all do that together this morning. Press right. Yeah. So the first section this morning, I'm going to do two. The first section this morning is really about the whole area of storytelling, how to write your story. And from what I've just heard, I think you've all got it pretty well in your heads what your story is. But hopefully, as a 20-ish year experienced person in this field, I might be able to give you some guidance, a few tips on how to tell that story a little bit more effectively. I'll just preempt this whole thing by saying, this isn't art. This is not science. It is very much, we're talking about human emotion here. So there really is no right or wrong. It really is about touching people in terms of their hearts and minds in order to prompt the action that you want. And I think just bear that in mind, because I will share with you some examples. And of course, some of these I think are, and they're not things that I've necessarily done, but there's some fantastic examples of storytelling through video. But look at those as aspirational, because you've all got different stories to tell, and there will be different ways of telling your story. But hopefully I'll give you some structure to be able to put that together. Right, let's start off. Any Star Wars fans in the room? Yeah. So, you always start a story once upon a time, but this one didn't it? Wasn't it in a galaxy far, far away? But never mind, that's for the purposes of this morning. So once upon a time, far away from the houses of the rich, in an ordinary place, a young man lived. The place was called, Star Wars experts, come on. What was it called? I know there's been so many since. The boys got it. The young man's name was Luke Skywalker. He had no mother and father and lived with his uncle and aunt. We get really serious with the typeface here. One day he receives a message from a man with a beard called Obi-Wan Kenobi. His message: you must go and fulfill your destiny. You're not a normal human being, you are a Jedi. He uses an amazing form of transport. He battles a bad guy called Darth Vader. The young man wins, but using his spirit, not his weapons. And the story ends with a big celebration. Okay, I know we've had Star Wars point 10 or whatever, so many different episodes, but that is essentially the core of the story. Okay, anybody know this one? Once upon a time, far away from the house of the rich, in an ordinary place, a young man lived. The place was called... Oh, tricky one, this. Privet Drive. The young man's name was... Yay! He had no mother and father and lived with... his uncle and aunt. Hang on a minute. One day he receives a message from a man with a beard. Called Hagrid. His message: you must go and fulfill your destiny. You're not a normal human being, you are a wizard. He uses an amazing form of transport. He battles a bad guy in robes called Voldemort. The young man wins, but using his spirit, not his weapons. And the story ends with a big celebration. Seeing a pattern here? Okay, one more. Once upon a time, far away from the houses of the rich, in an ordinary place, a young man lived. The place was called the Shire. The young man's name was Frodo Baggins. He had no mother and father and lived with his uncle. One day he receives a message from a man with a beard. What's going on? That's why I grew this. His name was Gandalf. His message: you must go and fulfill your destiny. You're not a normal human being, you are a ring bearer. Okay, give me that one. He uses an amazing form of transport. He battles a bad guy in robes called Any experts out here? Sauron. The young man wins, but using his spirit, not his weapons. And the story ends with a big celebration. Three of our most loved stories of recent times. And notice some similarities there. Now, I'm not saying that every story is the same. But I think that goes to prove that there is a certain pattern to great stories. And this is what we're talking about today. There is a pattern, there is a structure to great stories. And it's actually pretty logical when you think about it. Now, I'm, again, not saying that your story has to exactly follow this pattern, but it is a great way to think about how you're going to tell your story, because it gives you at least a start point as to how you can move your story towards a point where you are touching hearts and minds. We call it the classic story arc. And I'm going to go through another little story here, which I'm sure you will know, particularly if you've got children, but even from our childhood. Which starts with the setting and the characters. Anybody, any ideas on the story? Cinderella. But when you think about fairy tales and classic stories, you can actually apply this pretty much throughout. So it starts with the creation of the setting and the characters. So where and when, obviously who, and it doesn't not necessarily classically just this, but essentially you'll start a story with that approach. And then the key aspect of this is conflict. The conflict, the issue, the problem. And this very much applies to a lot of your situations, right? Obviously, the plastic in our seas. So there's no doubt that there is an issue around that. So there has to be the conflict. Because without conflict, we're not really going to reach out to people's emotions. We're not really going to touch them. And it's all very well to... And I deal with corporate organisations all the time. And this doesn't just apply to video. It applies to a lot of communications. And when you're working with a big corporate, they just don't want to tell anything negative. They don't want to highlight anything that is... I do a lot of work with our friends, the bank, which starts with an H. And you know the world we live in today, particularly with social media, I know you'll kind of come on to that, but there is just no escaping that. You're much better to confront that conflict, that issue, and then show how that you can, you know, what you do, what you guys are doing, and how you can bring about some resolution to that conflict. So conflict is key, and you should not shy away from it. And in fact, from a video point of view and a storytelling point of view, the greater the conflict and the greater you can push that to almost the point of despair. I mean, you know, the point in the story that all is lost, the more effective the next stage will be. Now, I'm not saying that you really want to get completely desperate with this, but that, you know, when you think about it in that way, because when you build up the conflict to the point of all is lost, then when the fairy godmother arrives with her magic wand, or the knight in shining armour, or the NGO here to save the day, it's going to be that much more effective. So this is where you reach the sort of the climax of the story. Obviously, in our context, the conflict was, of course, which I failed to say, what was the famous line? No, you will not go to the ball. And then the fairy godmother comes along with her magic wand. Cinders, you will go to the ball. And then it magics up the carriage from the mice, the horsemen, whatever. And of course, then she meets Prince Charming. And now this takes a little bit of a dip as well. You know, she loses the golden crystal slipper, whatever it was, on the stairs at midnight, and hurries back. So there's always an opportunity to dip in a little bit more. But then, of course, the resolution. And this is important also in terms of, you know, it's not just about the happy ending. There's, particularly in your context, there's action to be taken. The action here was, obviously, they had to go and find the foot that fit the crystal slipper. And then, as we all know, there was a happy ever after ending when she marries the prince. So talking through that when you think about it, and you can apply this to various different stories, very much the stories that we've just been going through, it is a core structure that, when you think about it, is really logical. But it is a really good start point for any storytelling. So let's look at this a little bit more specifically in your context. So here, and I've just picked this out as an example, you know, obviously you need to create the setting, what is the situation, and the characters that are involved, the background to what you're doing, and maybe the beneficiaries, or whatever other audience you want to include in this. And then, of course, the conflict. So in your context, it will be the issue, the problem, the cause that you are working towards. So, and again, I emphasize that you don't have to be completely extreme about this, but, you know, it's important to get that across. It's important to set that up. And then, of course, your story climax, the solution, your NGO activities and services that will hopefully then bring about the resolution. And then, not forgetting, which should be on the slide, is the call to action, what you want people to do in order to reach this resolution. So in your context, you might not have the resolution. You might be putting out the promise of the resolution, and then if somebody takes action, if the people take action, if you can get people into the concert halls, then you will find the resolution to what you're trying to achieve. So again, it gives you a sort of classic story arc, and this is what we're going to ask you to do in the breakout activity in a few minutes' time, to just think through your story in this context. I know you've done the message house and you've already expressed your story very eloquently this morning, but to put it into this context gives you a great start to how you can then move towards a video, which will be the second part. Just some final tips. I think there's some great ways that you can do this if you still adopt that classic story arc. I think it's a great opportunity to make it personal. You know, obviously, a lot of your causes, a lot of what you're doing can affect a lot of different people, and it might be a multitude of people that you're trying to help. But that doesn't necessarily mean to say that you have to try and to cover everybody. By just focusing down on one single story, that may be the way that you can bring forth. You know, maybe it's that graduate who has gone from here to here in terms of their English speaking capabilities and what that's meant for their career, and that's a very effective way of getting it across, because it touches hearts and minds more effectively than spilling out a lot of stats or talking about the hundreds of people that you've helped. You know, we identify with personal stories. This example, the next three examples were suggested by Asian Charity Services, and I was sort of looking around for relevant examples, but I think these really hit the nail. And this is a fantastic story that is very personal.
I had just arrived in Uganda. And I met a man who would show me just how much one person could sacrifice to give his daughters something he never had, something we often take for granted: an education. His name is Musisi. He's a man who is so dedicated to his girls' education that he begins every day at 4 a.m, preparing for the 2-hour drive to the market to sell his harvest. He spent the last 30 years sweating blood and tears in the dirt and mud to provide an education for his girls, but it's never enough. He knows that without an education, their lives will be spent in darkness. While here, I've met girls married as teenagers to men 4 times their age, abused so badly that trips to the ER happen weekly, or girls who have suffered a life of servitude from the tender age of 6. But one thing can prevent all that, and that's keeping his girls in school. So he rises at 4 a.m, works for 18 hours, and he does this again on the next day, and the next day, and the next. When the sun is too hot to harvest, he crafts bricks from mud by hand. He sells the bricks for 3 cents each. He will have to make 69,000 bricks to put his girls through school. When he can't make enough bricks, when there's no harvest, he sells a cow. When there's no cow, he barters with the headmistress. But now the cow's gone, the harvest is weak, and his debt is mounting. His options dwindling.
Nga Esther bamubanja era bakwata paslip ate era still ebiseera biweddeyo kuba bajeetaga beetaaga paslip ya P7 kubanga agenda mu S3 bajeetaga ku ssomero naye nkyayiiyo okulaba nti nfuna ssente sinazifuna.
I know when I met you the first time, Musisi, I was so inspired and humbled by you. And you said to me, you will fight for your girls, you will never give up. No matter what happens, you will always make sure that they go to school. So we went to visit Esther's school and we decided to pay the remaining balance. So we picked this up from Esther's school the other day and that balance is now paid.
Ye certificate gye baali bakwata ku ssomero yagenze n'azisasula ssente zonna
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So much. Let me.
Oh, thank you, Musisi. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Us. Thank you. Thank you.
It's terrible.
He has lost words.
Musisi.
Simani.
Thanks to Musisi's unshakable commitment and the support of One Girl's amazing community, his daughters, Sandra, Sharon and Esther, have all received full scholarships. And Musisi will no longer have to worry about them being able to graduate.
Around in that particular area. So man is also very important. He creates employment opportunity.
There are girls across the world fighting for any opportunity to go to school, and we can help them do it. When we educate a girl, it not only changes her life, but the lives of those around her. Not only is she lifted from the cycle of poverty, but her family, community, and country rise with her.
Animals that are
by cutting them.
So we've looked
Education can change everything.
The rivers, which we have called the water bodies. We've looked at the mountains.
So fantastic video, quite emotional. Now, as I said earlier, you know, these are up here. These are tough to replicate, but I think they show some basic principles. I mean, you saw the story arc there, and what's interesting, and I failed to mention, is you tend to that arc isn't necessarily. There's different arguments on this, but I feel the arc isn't necessarily equal. You tend to have the build-up for longer and then the resolution. But also what you'll note from that was personal story that then is expanded. So that's another quite a good technique to tell a personal story and then to sort of multiply that out to get your point across. Of course, this is your opportunity to be creative. You know, all the stuff you have to do on corporate reporting and report writing, and this is your opportunity to use the creative, was it the right side of your mind? Yes. But obviously be practical. And, you know, I'll say this a few times today, you know, just watch the dollars. This is a fantastic video, I think. I mean, it's a great way of stepping back and turning the whole thing on its head, which is a great way to approach this. I'm sure it's not as a production value that I think it is, because I'm sure it was all shot probably in the States, although it doesn't seem that way. But it still costs a lot of money, I'm sure. So, but just watch and enjoy. I just think it's a clever video.
You are a good person. You spend time with your family. You work out at the gym.
Come on, push, push.
You conserve water while showering. You like nice clothes. You give to charity. You recycle. You drive a Prius, but you use your bike when you can. You enjoy the occasional distraction at work, and you always send a card on Mother's Day. Always. But there's a part of you that tells yourself that you're not so good, that you could be doing more, that the world is falling apart at the seams, and all you've been doing is yoga. One day, you see that the rainforest is being destroyed at a staggering rate of 32 million acres a year. That's the equivalent of one football field every 78 seconds. You feel bad, angry, guilty. You've been apathetic for too long. You want to do something about it. You must do something about it. Well, this is what you're not going to do.
I quit!
You're not going to quit your job, leave your family, get on the next flight to Nicaragua, take a bus to the edge of the jungle, then hoof it across rivers, lakes, and streams on a quest to the very heart of the rainforest.
Take me to the heart of the rainforest.
You're getting closer. You're almost there. You have arrived.
You're not going to ingratiate yourself with the local tribesmen, go to great lengths to earn their respect and trust.
Nope. No.
It is around now you realize you're living out the cliché gringo fantasy of becoming an honorary native and leading the resistant forces. But screw it. If they could do it, so can you.
I'm gonna save you! This guy comes over here, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna pull a zapping, that's right through him, right over here.
You're not going to coordinate and occupy the rainforest movement, realize it's hopeless, summon the power of the gods, lead a revolution against the deforesters and their multinational employers in an apocalyptic, once-and-for-all battle to save humanity, only to awaken 2 days later in an El Salvadorian hospital with 2 toes missing on your left foot.
Siri, I wanna go home.
Hobble out of Central America, up through Mexico, across the Sierra Madre, where you break down, have your first cigarette in 4 years, accidentally start a wildfire, killing off the endangered species that once served as your occupational distraction, finally make it back home, only to find you've been replaced at work by a guy named TJ, and that things at home are not what they used to be. You're not going to do any of these things, but what you can do is follow the frog. Buying Rainforest Alliance certified products ensures the future of our rainforests, so that you don't have to do the things you shouldn't do anyway. Just follow the frog.
I mean, just inspiring, huh? Yeah. God, I wish I'd done that. What on Max, all these guys. Now, like I said, you know, that's high-value production, whichever way you read it. I mean, that's a fantastic approach. But, you know, again, that whole way of they've turned that around. You know, that's the opportunity to think creatively. I mean, there was a line here which was something like, lose the headphones. You know, is there something in that around your video that you could really make something of, rather than just, you know, it's going to be difficult for you guys to present something that you want as a live experience in a medium that you're trying to get away from, right? So there's your challenge. But yeah, I just think, you know, and hopefully these sorts of things will inspire you. I think also consider your options. You know, one of the challenges you're going to have, which we're going to come on to in the second section, is the visual content. This is not my favorite video of all, but I think it's a great way of bringing forth a lot of stats, which again we'll talk about a little bit later, and turning them into something which is more effective than it might have been if it was just a series of stats. But just have a look at this one as well, just to consider different options, particularly when you're briefing, if you're lucky enough to work with a video production company, to consider different options and approaches. So again, a different treatment. Don't underestimate how difficult that is to do. I mean, just the writing of that, the animation effects, quite a tricky thing to pull off. But again, I think you can see the story arc, right? It's very apparent in that you know, it goes up to that conflict point, and then even the soundtrack changes to then get to the resolution. So it's an interesting way to approach it. I don't think it touches your heart as much as some of the other sort of more emotional storytelling that you might have seen, but it is a different way of doing things. So that's my first piece this morning. You're all very inspired, aren't you? So now it's over to you guys to structure your story. Think about that story arc. You don't need to stick to it rigidly, but just express. This is your opportunity to express your story in a sort of structured way. I think you've got a worksheet that we'll talk about in a second, and be a little bit not necessarily creative in the structure that you tell, but really think about what the messages you want to get across. The second part, we'll take that and try and move it closer to what a video might look like. So this is your opportunity just to tell your story through bullet points or whatever, and then the second part will be sort of really putting that into a framework that is going to work in a video format, because obviously you now need to be quite efficient with your words, you need to think visually, but at the moment let's just focus on what the story is.